The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses and nonprofits better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources they need to take their organization to the next level. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, management and HR consultants John Thalheimer and Chuck Smickian dive into the stories that matter to small business owners, nonprofit leaders, and HR professionals. We continue to be amazed at how companies allow poor decision-making, lack of knowledge, or in some cases, hubris to cause harm to their organizations. Each week, we discuss stories where companies must pay large fines, lose great talents, and even stain their reputation within the community. And then we tell you how to avoid the same fate. Welcome to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. Welcome to the team of HR Stories, where there's a lesson in every story. Chuck, I feel like it's been a long time since we've been in the studio together. What's going on?
It's been forever. Well, as you know, and maybe our listeners know, we try and stay ahead of the curve on these podcasts, but I did take a couple of weeks off, took an extended vacation. So it's good to be back and to be back in the HR saddle again and ready to go. John, there is so much going on in HR. I was at a conference on Friday called the Wayfinder Summit, and it was a number of great speakers. And the first speaker on Friday was an HR attorney that was going to talk about updates in what's going on in the world, right, or in the country. And he gets up and he overextends his time by at least 10 or 15 minutes. And then it was like the Academy Awards. They had to push him off. And he said, "I'm so sorry." He said, "There is so much going on in the HR world as far as employment law and upcoming things and the National Labor Relations Board, ESC, Department of Labor." He says, "I could spend all day here talking. I need more than an hour." And everyone applauded him. And then we got on to the next speaker. But it's really something, John, as we wind up 2023.
Yeah, was there one thing like he said that you're like, oh, our listeners need to know that? Was there one thing that was outstanding that we haven't mentioned, or something that you're like, oh, we haven't really got into that, we need to get into that? Anything standing out there?
Yeah, there was a time. I mean, if you look at this book right here, and 3 slides each, right? 3 slides each. He's got 28 pages. So what's 28 times 3 slide-wise? Nothing comes to mind.
84.
Right now, the white-collar overtime exemption rule, that was a big thing that we need to make sure our listeners remember. We need to make sure by now, as our listeners are listening to this, they need to be using the new I-9 form. There's the EEOC is becoming extremely aggressive on its investigations, and they released their strategic enforcement plan for 2024 through 2028, and a lot of it has to do with the underrepresentation of women and workers of color in different industries like construction and manufacturing, and also overly broad waivers, releases, non-disclosure agreements. So there's just so many things. And John, I got to tell you, and I'll tell our listeners, keep listening to the HR Stories podcast and get to the team at hrstories.com. Check out our classes. We've got all kind of great things to keep our listeners and our viewers updated.
Yeah, I mean, the one that I would recommend is What Did You Miss, right? Our on-demand course of What Did You Miss? That is now on demand. If you haven't gone and got that, go to the team at hrstories.com and you will see that. It's called Lessons You Might Have Missed, the summer edition. But we went through a lot of that stuff that lawyer was talking about in that session. So definitely something that you might want to check out and kind of do if you're like, oh, what did I miss? Again, right? That lawyer didn't have an hour and that wasn't enough time. we're not going to be able to cover it in here, particularly today, but we will make sure that as things come up, we're paying attention to the exempt employee salary. We know there's going to be changes as we get into 2024. So we're going to make sure that we're broadcasting that information out on the podcast. So I was just fascinated that you had that opportunity, Chuck, to go there, learn from other HR experts, and really kind of put in your input and find out what's going on. So
yeah, a lot of great stuff we'll be able to definitely utilize going forward. What's going on in John's world?
In John's world, in Wayne's world. Well, I want to talk about COVID because as much as we think, oh, COVID's gone, we don't need to worry about it anymore. My wife and I both had bouts of COVID where I was out. I mean, I was sick for 3, maybe 5 days where I was just not there. And it was really interesting, right? So I didn't have as much of a fever. I had it, but it's kind of spiked back and forth. But what got me the most was I had brain fog, right? And so I just couldn't concentrate. I couldn't focus and that kind of stuff. And so as we start going into this new flu season, as we start thinking about 2024, this is just kind of my point to say to everyone, pay attention, right? Pay attention to what's going on. And also make sure you're going back to your policies and making sure they're clear for 2023 and beyond and what you're going to do. What's the plan? So if somebody has COVID, obviously we don't want them to go to work. What the CDC is saying now that person should, if somebody has COVID or tested positive for COVID, they should stay out of the workplace for 5 days and not come in because they're still contagious. And so I think, I don't know, that to me is really important. I know more and more people are getting COVID. I know, Chuck, you had it back in August. So we just need to be paying attention. And I just don't want people to go, oh, well, that's fine. I would take a moment to go through my contagious disease policies and making sure they're clarified. And this is what we're going to do. And this is how we're going to handle them. You don't want to have an outbreak on your staff is really what I'm kind of saying when I'm addressing that. So,
and spoken from personal experience.
Yeah, it was bad. I mean, I hope no one ever gets it because it was bad. I mean, this is the second time I got it, and it was worse the second time. And I was knocked out. There wasn't much I could do. I mean, I tried to get some work done and did some other things, but it was mostly just laying around.
Yeah, and you're right, being prepared. And I have some, as HR consultant, right? People call us, friends call us, hey, what do you know? What are you hearing? We have our team, HR Team of One community on Facebook, and I'm starting to get people that are having to refresh themselves again as to what do we do when an employee calls in and when there's have COVID and what's our responsibility. So great reminders,
Yeah, I mean, when I was like, I don't know what to do, like, I was like, okay, how long do I need to stay out of it? Like, how long do I need to quarantine? How should I quarantine and all that kind of stuff? And I was like, it all came back to me quickly, but I was like, oh, what are we going to do?
Like
so
riding a bike.
Going on, Chuck?
Like riding a bike, like telling a story. Well, like telling a story. I have to tell you, one of the things, John, when we teach a lot of our classes, especially you and I both teach payroll law class. We teach a payroll law class. We give a lot of advice on payroll law. One of the things that I always talk about is, and actually the attorney on Friday during this thing talked about, keeping track as with the new standard, the new threshold, and how we're increasing that. And some people don't want to be hourly employees, and we're not. And so we may let people slide on calculating, keeping track of their time, because sometimes people think, oh, I'm salaried. Now I have to punch in and out now that, so he says, look, you keeping track of people's time is a huge thing. And I know you and I talk about, there's employers a lot of times do these automated lunch deductions.
Oh, yeah.
And I've worked for a couple of companies that has been that were stung by that. And going forward, every time I work for a new company or as a consultant going in to advise a new company, I recommend they get rid of the auto lunch deduction unless there's a specific reason for it or they have a specific way of guaranteeing those folks are taking their time. And here's why. There's a security company. You've probably heard of them, Allied, right? They have the patches, Allied Universal Security Services. Guess they had to just pay $1.1 million following a Department of Labor investigation that found that they wrongfully deducted meal break time for hundreds of employees. And when I joke and say that's low-hanging fruit to have the Department of Labor come in and investigate these types of things, it really is. So DOL Wage and Hour Division, they investigated Universal Protection Service, which does business as Allied Security Services. And they said that what was happening was Allied was deducting 45 minutes from the work days, every work day, from its security employees, even though sometimes it required them to stay at their posts during some or all of that time. And it involved 778 employees. And here's the deal, and I know you and I talk a lot about this. Not only was it the back pay, which was only $550,000, but it was the liquidated damages, so they always double that, right? And so, and then get this, the DOL, this was in the press release, for good measure. I mean, they didn't say for good measure, but they just threw on another $50,000 fine, civil penalty, just because they were like, you know what, boo on you as we come out of our Halloween season. You know, so that's just something you have to keep in mind. You know, if you're doing the auto deductions, are you making sure your employees are definitely taking that break? If not, you've got to stop those auto deductions. So that was the big story that I saw come across today.
Yeah, that's a great story because it is so easy because, we know they always take a half an hour break. We don't want to punch in and punch out, so we'll automatically deduct it. But what if they're not? What if they're working? You have to pay them hours worked, right? And so I love that you brought that up. Such a good example of small things that if we're not paying attention to or we're listening to our employer and the employer's like, well, that's what everybody wants. No, that's when we as HR professionals, as managers need to stand up and go, hey, we need to be paying attention to this. We need to do this right. And I love that you go into the clients, Chuck, and go, no, we're getting rid of that. I know that you can do it in the system. We're getting rid of it because we want to make sure people are punching in and punching out and we're paying them for their time. So I get it.
What do you got? Chuck? You got a little story for us?
It's not a story really. I'm not going to make it into a story, but I was reading this article about the challenges we have with pay equity, right? And so we know that right now in the United States that for every dollar a male worker makes, female workers are making 83.7 cents, right? We know that, right? And so the company McKinsey Consultant and Lean In, right? And so from the book Lean In, it's a nonprofit, did this big study, and what they found was that when we look at this and we think, oh, it's the glass ceiling that's stopping women from going up and all that kind of stuff, and getting into those executive roles, what they found was that it's not the glass ceiling. Yes, the glass ceiling is still an issue. Don't get us wrong. There's still a bias there. But what they found was what they called the broken rung theory. And when they looked at this, and they were looked at when people are being promoted into the manager role for the first time, it is more likely that a company will promote a male worker into the manager or supervisor role versus a female worker. And so we have to be paying attention. We have to understand when we're looking at promoting somebody from within into a supervisor or a manager role, are we being equitable in those promotions, and both on race and gender and religion and national origin and disability, and paying attention to all those to make sure that we are setting them up for success for long term in our company. And so I
Okay.
would say for everyone just to go back and look, hey, when we're hiring somebody into that first manager role, right? So our frontline supervisors, our frontline managers, how are we making sure that is an equitable promotion, and making sure that we are not unintentionally or intentionally not hiring women into that role. And so
Yeah.
just being aware of that, because it all goes into, if we think about having executive leaders at the Fortune 500 company, we need a pool of individuals that are experts that can be managers and leaders and directors and supervisors and vice presidents and presidents and CEOs. We need to have that pool of managers that we can promote from within, right? And so kind of doing that, I think just important, something that I came across. I was reading that article and I was like, wow, that's really fascinating that maybe it's happening at a lower place. And so
Yeah.
just
No,
something
I
to kind
like
of think
that.
about in there.
That's that. That, folks, is why you listen to the HR Stories podcast. We introduce you to all kind of new concepts, the broken rung syndrome or theory. I like that. John, a lot of times, and I want to say it's not intentional, although I've read enough stories where there are companies that are like, we're just promoting the guys,
Right.
guy code. I've seen that. But a lot of times it's not. And I think you and I shared a story that came out of an article that came out, talked about the mini me syndrome too, where if you have a lot of male managers in a company and they're looking to promote people to take their place, for some reason they have that mini me. Folks that you don't know what I'm talking about, just Google Austin Powers movies, and so they're looking for someone like me, the mini me, and that can just perpetuate those things. So, like you said, you have to take an intentional view of these things and say, hey, what can I do? Am I falling into a perpetual cycle rather than really? And you put it much more eloquently than me. So,
Well, but I mean, I think it's more, I think that goes with both male and female leaders. And it goes when we're up there and we're looking around and we know we've been successful in this role. A lot of times we go to hire somebody with our strengths in our organization, and that's not what we should be doing, right? Because we already have those strengths. We should be hiring people with different strengths to offset us and balance us and do that. And so that mini me, like, oh, I need somebody that's going to be just like me to get promoted into that manager role or that kind of stuff. We have to kind of throw that out and go, okay, what does this team need? And I think where HR is so valuable is when we're working with a manager to hire a new supervisor or new manager, we can step back because we're not personally involved. We can step back and go, okay, what does this role need? And then go, okay, well, who has that? And I don't know, Chuck, I don't know if you and I have this conversation. I'm sure we have. I get so frustrated when somebody goes, well, they're the subject matter expert. We need to promote them. And that's not true. We don't want to promote the subject matter expert. We want to promote people that are experts in management of others, because those are the ones that are going to be successful, right? And so I always think about, hey, if I'm promoting somebody into a manager role, it's not a subject matter expert I want. It's a managerial expert I want, right? And so getting that in there. And again, it's really hard for operational people to see that, but I'm always pushing kind of that tone in there. So something to kind of think about in there as well.
Yeah, and I like how you put it, and we'll just wrap that up because I have something to add, an article that I read. But as HR professionals, we can make a difference, and you brought that up because sometimes managers and directors and they don't see that, and HR professionals have the responsibility to say, hey, have you thought? Have you looked? Have you given consideration to? So great
Yeah, which I
Great
mean,
way
it
to
kind of
kind of.
leads into that workshop we did on, was that Tuesday we did that? Last
Mhm.
Tuesday we did, or last Wednesday we did a workshop called the HR and Manager Partnership. And like the people in the class were like, oh my God, we need to talk about this and how do you deal with this and that kind of stuff. So we're going to do that workshop again in the beginning of the new year because we felt that it was such a valuable tool and the people really got a lot out of there.
Yeah. So, John, one of the latest articles that came out was from the National Labor Relations Board. They are really cooking with gas. You know, I got to tell you, over my career, I haven't really thought too much about the National Labor Relations Board. They're just, you know, Department of Labor, EEOC, but man, the NLRB is really trying to make a name for itself. And they just last month in October finalized what they call the joint employer rule. And it's an ongoing story, and there's too much to break down here for this, but I just want to throw that out there to any of our listeners and employers that use, let's say, temp services, that use subcontractors. I'll give you an example. This story with Allied Universal Security, 700 employees, they don't work for Allied at an Allied facility. They work as security guards at your facility and your facility and their facility. And so they are subcontractors, they're third parties. However, under some of these new regulations, not only maybe, okay, and I'm putting, because a lot of this has to still be proven out in court. But if Allied does something wrong or treats their employees incorrectly and you have contracted with Allied, you may be on the hook. If you use temp employees for housekeeping or for different labor, manufacturing, if there's a problem, with their temp agency employer, you could be on the hook also as the larger employer. And I see this in the construction industry too, when it comes to things like maybe wage, hours, benefits, performance of duties, working conditions, especially related to health and safety. So that's really big news coming out that we're going to have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I definitely think National Labor Relations Board for 2024 is going to be an important thing to kind of pay attention. We've had some big union wins over the last couple of months. We've settled the writers' strike. A couple of the car unions have settled as well. And so we're going to see that, I think, more so in 2024. I think unions are going to raise their profile for sure. And so, again, paying attention to that joint employment is going to be important as well. Definitely.
Yeah.
Sure. Thanks for bringing that
John,
up.
it feels like it's time to maybe take a quick break. But before we do that, can you give us a hint about what the main story or your main gist of the rest of our HR Stories podcast is going to be about today?
Nope.
No? Playing hard to get.
Trying to see if you paid attention. If you guys aren't watching this on YouTube, Chuck got this expression like, what? What is he talking about? No. So, so here's the term that I'm going to throw out to you, Chuck. Holistic employment.
Okay. All right. I know those two words, and I know what employment is. And holistic, I usually think of it as like a doctor. So help me out here.
All right, yeah. So holistic employment, I'm going to say I made it up, right? So this is the first time you're hearing it, folks. Oh. It's because you heard it from me first. But really what I mean is that instead of just focusing on the employee when they're at work, should we focus on the whole employee? Because we know, right, that they they're influenced by what's happening outside of work, right? And so they're influenced by that. Should we take that into account? So that's what my story is about, and particularly about one employer doing that.
I love that. Interesting. always breaking new ground here on the HR Stories podcast. And of course, you've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story.
Hey everybody, it's Chuck with the team at HR Stories. The HR Stories podcast provides weekly lessons along with compelling HR news in a storytelling format. But we have found our listeners want more. You know, we know it's easy to be overwhelmed managing the day-to-day responsibilities of HR. We know HR can be isolating. And our listeners want a supportive community to turn to for advice and inspiration. And we've been there. We know what it's like. And that's why John and I at the team at HR Stories have created a membership program that goes beyond the HR Stories podcast. Imagine an education support group for new and experienced HR professionals alike, with twice monthly sessions and an opportunity to collaborate and network with your peers. Whether you are an HR team of one or you have HR as a responsibility, our membership program is designed to offer benefits that will elevate your knowledge and advance your career. Simply go to team@hrstories.com and click on the membership link in the top menu bar to learn more, or check out the link in the show notes below.
Welcome back. Today's topic is holistic employment here on the HR Stories podcast. And John, if I'm honest, well, I actually should say I understand the concept. I understand the concept, and I think it's kind of interesting to take a look at that, but buy into it from an employer standpoint and dealing with employees' issues outside of work. And so I really want you to get into that, because I'd be afraid to say, okay, where does that line drawn and how does this all come together?
I get it. I totally get that. So look, you know, Chuck, that I've spent a lot of my time studying workplace performance, right? How do I improve workplace performance? How do we get better? How do employees get better? What do managers need to improve workplace performance, right? And that's really my focus. If we walk away at the end of the day, that's my focus, right? And so when we look at workplace performance, one of the critical factors is energy. Right. And so by energy, it's our ability to apply effort to our performance, right? Mm-hmm. Which kind of says there, right? So our energy is a level of effort that we can give or that we do give at any given time, right? So an employee's energy is not just derived from the workplace. It's not like I walk in, punch in, and all of a sudden I have 100% energy, and then I'm going to go for the rest of the day. When I punch out, then I have a whole nother set of energy, right? Outside factors influence the amount of energy an employee has available at any given time. So for instance, let me give you for instance, right? And so I know you've been in this situation, right? So think of a new parent with a baby at home.
Oh, sure.
Right? And so when that baby, right, they have that baby, they're going to struggle, right? They're going to struggle. Their energy level will be lower because they're spending more energy at home than on their new baby, right? And that's not a bad thing. That's where they should be spending their energy. But that means they're going to have less energy for when they go to work. Or if an employee is struggling with caring for an adult parent, they may have less energy to do their work, right? And there could be 1,000 of those reasons.
Yeah, no, I like that. Okay, starting to get a good picture. Yes, I remember being a new dad. I remember being distracted, thinking about things. It's kind of funny you bring this up, because just literally last week, I read an article where it talked about employees that are pregnant, that are going through their first trimester, and how it can be well, they use the term hell, so but because rarely employers are privy to it. A lot of times those first 3 months, employees are trying to keep things private. But if you do know about that, and that someone is pregnant, you know, there are things you can do to help them out and keep in mind, and that sort of thing. So I think I see where you're going, is not so much getting into hey, what did you eat for breakfast this morning at home and what did you do? But being concerned about anything that could take someone's energy away, because we all only have so much energy. So I kind of like where this going. It sounds maybe a little new agey, maybe, I don't know. So help me out.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, right? There are times that we go into work and we don't give 100%, right? We just don't, because we just don't have it. Maybe we stayed up late watching the game the night before. Maybe our commute was bad. Right? There's 1,000 reasons that we can't apply 100% energy, right? And so it does get into new agey. It can be, right? But I think it has some practical applications to our workplace. And so recently I heard a story about an employer with over 1,300 employees and 13 different business units across the United States. They recently did a survey focused on performance factors such as nutrition, strength training, family life, and wellness. Overall, the business units were doing well. So they were profitable, they were doing well, and most were consistently, right? Most of them were consistently profitable. However, some were not achieving the results the owner wanted. So the employer was concerned, the owner of this company was concerned that the working conditions in the various business units were holding their employees back from being engaged in the organization's mission, right? And so when we look at a large business with 1,300 employees, with 32 business units, we can start seeing that maybe how the employees are being treated at the different business units may reduce the amount of energy they have and therefore not making those companies successful in getting the results we want. So according to Gallup, employers with a higher level of employee engagement have a higher level of profitability right across the board, right? So if you have high level of employees are giving their discretionary effort to you, then those companies are going to be much more successful. Additionally, engaged employees have a high level of well-being, they have better retention, and a high level of productivity across the board.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I've read those studies. Employee engagement and discretionary effort can really boost an employee's or an employer's productivity. I mean, it'll boost an employee's productivity, which ultimately boosts the employer's productivity, right? It's the opposite of quiet quitting, where the employee is doing just the bare minimum to get by, but this is the opposite.
Yeah, right. So exactly, right. And so we hear a lot about quiet quitting and quiet firing, right? We're putting quiet in front of everything. And so this particular employer wanted to understand how decisions that were made at the different business units were impacting the employees' discretionary efforts. So he sent out a confidential survey to all the employees.
Okay. So what areas did they focus on?
All right, so they focus on 6 major areas. The effectiveness of training and development, right? And so Chuck and I fall into that, right? Because we know that's important. The resources available to improve the employee's skill and abilities, right? And so not only are we getting developed, but are we giving them the tools and the resources they need to take those skills and get them better? The workplace accommodations impact on productivity. So how much the accommodations that we are getting, right? Workplace accommodations. The use and value of coaches and mentors in the workplace. That's one of my subjects. I love that. I think it's important. The employee's wellness program influence results. So how much did wellness programs influence the employees' results? And then finally, how were the employees' families were treated?
Oh, okay. Interesting. I never would have thought. I mean, I got to tell you, I kind of see where you're going here, but to see this as a tangible question, I never would have thought about asking my employees how they perceived how the company was treating their families, their employees.
Right. Me neither. I mean, I never really thought about it either. But when you think about it, how our employees' families are doing impacts how much effort, how much energy an employee has to give to the organization, right? Because if I'm struggling with a challenge at home, I may not be able to give as much information, much energy to the employee on there.
Sure, sure. So where is that intersection, John, between what the company does and the employee's family?
Right, there's many different ways, but let's look at the major one, right? Health insurance. So not
Oh, yeah.
only do a lot of companies provide insurance to our employees, but we offer it to their family and at different levels, right? And so some companies I hear, oh, we give all of their beneficiaries, we give them 100% health insurance. Where other companies go, oh, they have to pay for it. They can have it, but they have to pay for it, right? And so when I know when my family has health insurance and they have the necessary medication, the necessary doctors to go to, it reduces my stress levels. And I feel I'm a little bit better. I can put in a little bit more effort.
Sure, sure. I got to tell you, I've worked, for the best companies that I've worked for when it comes to health insurance, not only do above and beyond what's legal for your individual employees, but they give more money to employee and family, employee and children. And that is such a huge relief off people to think, oh my gosh, how am I going to budget to pay for this really hefty employee and children and family policy? So yeah, look, I got to tell you, most employees do engagement surveys asking similar questions. I like the Gallup's Q12 engagement survey and they've been using this for decades and have collected information from thousands of employers about engagement in the workplace. And the best thing about that, John, is it's factual stuff. It's not, oh, let me think. I think this is what engagement is. I mean, they really boil it down to facts, don't they?
Yeah, they really do. They do a fantastic job of presenting. You can go to Gallup and they'll list the 12 questions, but they have the data to compare you to other things and that kind of stuff. So they have great things. They've been doing that, as you said, decades. And so I think it's a great place for us to start building our employee engagement surveys, right? And kind of looking at that there as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's one question that I've always liked, and I've seen it played out time and time and time in the workplace in my experience.
Yeah, and I bet I can guess which one it is.
Absolutely. Do you have a best friend at work?
Yeah, I knew it, right? But I always felt when I read it the first time, I always felt like that was an invasion of privacy to me. Like, why does the organization care if I have a best friend at work?
Yeah. Me at first, I was like, that's kind of a wonky question. But what Gallup explains is those individuals that have that best friend doesn't mean that that's their overall best friend in life, but they have a best friend at work that they connect with, and those folks typically have a higher level of engagement scores and put in more what you've called discretionary effort.
Yeah, right. And so it makes sense to me, right? And so we as humans are social creatures. And we're going to be more willing to put in an additional effort if we know it's going to help somebody who we have strong bonds with.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and also want to put in that additional effort because of our partnership together.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so again, right, I'm putting in additional efforts because I know that if I don't, I'm going to let Chuck down, right? If I don't show up to the podcast recording, or if I show up unprepared, not going to be there, right? And so I know there are times when I'm tired and don't feel like working, but because I do that work, Chuck, because I don't want to let you down.
Yeah. And that's true for most of us. So, okay. So going back to this, what did the owner find out about? Because we could talk forever about this stuff. What did the owner find out about the survey?
Right. So there were a few business units that were knocking it out of the park in all the focus areas, right? No matter the business unit. However, no matter the business unit, there were areas to work on. For instance, the business unit in Miami was rated high in most categories, but fell short in how families were treated. On the other hand, the unit in Los Angeles was poorly rated in most categories, but was still achieving results for the overall organization.
Yeah. Okay. I guess that is to be expected.
Yeah, I mean, I think right and around there always is expected. Wait, people are going to be doing well and poor. There's always going to be things we can work on. Chuck, have you ever heard the old adage, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it?
Yes, absolutely. I say that to clients all the time.
Right? Because it's one of the things, right? And so, well, the owner took advantage of that adage and sent the full survey results to the leader of each business unit. So not only could they see their own results, but they could also see the results of their peers. And so the business leader knew that the leaders were highly competitive and they would want to improve their standings. Like, oh, well, Miami's doing this, right? We better do it as well, right? They knew that was there. So the owner additionally also scheduled quarterly meetings to share best practices and discuss ways to improve the overall employee experience.
Yeah, I love that. Do we know if it's having an impact on the business units and the way they treat their employees?
Well, right now it's too early to tell, right? We don't know because that's the first time they did the survey, right? And so we're going to keep following it to see if things change. But my expectation, they're probably going to change a little bit.
All right. You have been hiding the name of the employer. I noticed just now. Who is the employer? Was it like a super secret thing or what's going on?
Well, interestingly enough, it's not a super secret thing, but it was the National Football League. Heard of that? NFL, right? National Football League.
Wow. I love that. I love that.
Yeah. So I changed a couple of details. It wasn't the league. It wasn't the National Football League that did the survey, but it was the Players Association, because the goal was of changing the team's perspective on how the players were being treated. And so it is totally a fascinating read on how the individual teams treated the players so differently. I was surprised about how they did that and went into that as well.
Yeah. So was there a correlation between these things? How the players were treated and how they did on field? Sorry.
Yeah. And so when I look at this, right, and so that was my question really as I was reading through this, were the teams that treated the players best, right, that had the highest engagement survey based on this survey, were they the ones that were winning the Super Bowl? And what we found, right, was, yes, over time, there wasn't a direct correlation. Like you couldn't be like, okay, well, this team won the Super Bowl, so they must have the best thing. However, those teams who over time had winning records were more likely to treat their employees better, right? So those teams that are typically in the top 10 winning teams in the NFL had higher engagement scores.
Okay. And yeah, that is interesting. So what's your takeaway here on this?
Well, so here's my big takeaway, and here's why I wanted to address this, right? Because I started, when I read this and I listened to, actually heard this first from Freakonomics radio show. So if you don't listen to Freakonomics, definitely go check it out. Great podcast, great radio show. And they were talking about this particular thing. But what got me thinking was, what if we start treating our employees like NFL stars, right? NFL players. So what if we started doing that? Or a Broadway producer treats their stars. If we look at all the variables that go into an employee's performance, their energy level, and boost the positive energy, and then dampen those negative energy, what would that look like?
Yeah, I like that. And so the whole theory that you're proposing, which I'm thinking, there's a million thoughts flooding my mind right now, but it's boosting the positive energy, dampening the negative energy, and then they will perform better at work.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Right. I mean, that's what I think. That's my thing.
All right. So let's translate that to what that would look like.
All right, so let's look at that from a stress example, right? So we know stress impacts employees' performance, it impacts their energy. And so we know there are simple things that can be done to reduce stress.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. But what are some things that an employer can do to reduce stress?
Yeah, and so the key here is what can they do to help reduce stress, right? That's
sure.
key,
That's
right?
what I meant. Yeah.
Reduce stress, right? I don't think we can just put it on the employer, right? We can't say, well, you NFL player, you're not performing well because your strength training coach is a jerk, right? We can't say that, right? It's still up to the employee, right? It's still up there. But I do think the employer can do some things to reduce stress.
Yeah. For instance, let's get a couple of examples.
I have a whole list, but I'm not going to go through all of these. But let me give you some examples. Could we increase the availability of exercise time for the employee? So according to many, many, many studies, exercise can help reduce stress and boost our energy. Employers could do this. We could include a gym on site, afternoon exercise breaks built into the schedule, or free appointments with a physical trainer, right? Those are some things that are simple and probably wouldn't cost the company too much money.
Yeah, I love those.
Yeah, right. So here's another one, right? We know that social connection is really important, right? We've talked about that earlier, right? Why do you have a best friend at work? That social connection is there. One of the things that we can do, and we moved away from this. So back in the 80s and the 90s, we used to do this more often, but we kind of moved away from it because I don't think people understood the impact it was having. But could we create affinity groups where people would come together that have things in common and gather together to have fun, share knowledge, increase their self-belonging? So let me give you an example. So a softball team, right? A company softball team, for those people that want to play softball, that creates that social connection, and I feel better at work, right? Think about single moms. If you have an affinity group for single moms, they can get together, they can share best practices and knowledge, and they can build this camaraderie across that, right? So again, that's another thing, and it's a simple thing we need to do. HR can put affinity groups in pretty easy and say, all right, we're going to spend $100 or $200 on each affinity group. And so for the softball, maybe that's uniforms. For the single moms, maybe that's little lunch breaks or something that they can do. And then, right? And so business knowledge, right? We know that one of the things, I don't know about for you, but when I was in corporate America, right, and I'm running this big team, I found out I was most stressed when I didn't know what I was doing, right? When my lack of knowledge was down. So building knowledge, having people become more knowledgeable about their role, about interpersonal skills, right? All of those things can reduce stress. Again, that's something that we can do to help that person, right, holistically do that. Now, I'm talking about some of the stuff in-house. We could also go out of house as well, right? And maybe the employees are dealing with a childcare issue, or maybe they're dealing with some kind of stress. Maybe their parent is sick, right? Can we direct them to our employee assistant program, right, the EAP, and say, hey, we have these resources available to you to help reduce your stress, so they can get in there.
Yeah, I love that, and I really, not only do I understand the strategy, but you're like flooding back things that I remember, things I've done and we've done in different companies to help with life's everyday frictions for our employees that would help them become more productive. And also help with the morale and retention. You know, when I worked at Universal Studios here in Orlando, we grew to the point that we had a great employee base in our wardrobe building right by the employee entrance. Employees could come in and out. We built a mini mart there. And we had candy and we had popcorn and we had all kind of fun things. But one of the best sellers, John, and you're going to love this, one of the best sellers we had was milk. And you might be thinking, oh, like a little bottle of milk. No. The employees we would sell gallons and half gallons of milk and bread because, number one, it's a 7-day-a-week operation. And it's almost 24 hours a day operation, asynchronous hours, lots of families, parents working there. And one of the things as people are working, they're thinking, I got to get home. I got to get to the grocery store. I got to pick up milk and bread. Milk and bread. Well, guess what? When they're running past the employee entrance to go out, they could stop. And we made the prices at cost as they would be at any grocery store. And we sold gallons and half gallons of milk and bread like you wouldn't believe. It's just the craziest thing. But that was one thing that the employees knew that they wouldn't have to worry about.
Right. And again, right, it reduces. It's like, oh, I know I can just, I'll stop and get that on the way home. I worked at a company called QVC, and we had a place that we could literally go drop off our dry cleaning. We could go there, and for a while they stopped doing it, but for a while we could get our car detailed, right? And so if you wanted to get your car detailed, you were like, okay, well, can you detail my car next week? And they're like, yeah, sure. Or you could drop off your dry cleaning, get it fixed or whatever. And it was so easy as part of that. Again, small things, not costing the company that much additional money, right? The detailing we would pay for. The dry cleaning, I think, was subsidized, but was still paid by the employee. But it was so much easier than, I have to stop at the dry cleaner on the way home, right? And so giving them those things can be really beneficial in there, right? And so they don't need to be that big. They can be small things as well. So those are great.
And just one more thing for some of our listeners are like, well, we can't build a mini mart. The notary. We would always have a notary for free in the company, then no matter how big our office was, because there were employees that always were like, I got to leave. I got to get to the bank. I got to get something notarized. No, we'll do it here, and we'll do it for free. And those are those little things, those little frictions. So this is great, John. Good angle today. I really like it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I just want to finish on what the NFL Player Association focused on, right? Because they did focus on wellness. They did focus on nutrition, strength training, mental health, and support, right? And so I think those are all opportunities for employer to support employees' health and wellness to make them better employees in there, right? And so I think that's really something in there is important as well.
Yeah, John, you have always provided me with great business books to read. I don't really like business books, but the ones you've given me have always been great. And I recall the story of the British biking team where and it was improving things just a little bit, reducing friction on the bikes, the tires, the wheels, the paint, and just doing all these little things, which led to a winning team. And just on their own, you would never think it would be a big deal, but it was all these little things reduced enough friction that the team, the British cycling team, was able to win all kind of trophies over the years because they reduced friction. They did those things. So your story just has some grand universal, and I mean universal like as in galaxy, large impact.
It's going to have a large implication. Yeah, that book was Atomic Habits by James Clear. Highly recommend it for anybody that wants it. And he talks about that example in there about improving things by the aggregated marginalized improvements. All right, doing small things to have big impacts, right? And so Chuck, that's a great kind of point on there. My final thoughts on this concept is holistic employment is not new. We've been doing that here and there for the past decades. However, I do think it's time as employers, we understand and we recognize that our employees are impacted by forces outside of work. And I think a lot of times we're not doing that. We're not recognizing that. And I think that's really important. And simple changes, to Chuck's point, can have a major impact on our employees' energy, their performance, and their life, right? And so kind of doing that as well.
Yeah. Hey, you've been listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there's a lesson in every story. Don't forget to like our podcast, comment, subscribe. 5 stars would be great. And John, thank you for bringing the concept of holistic employers to the HR Stories podcast today.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.